I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked. If you're that person who sets goals that challenge you to fully reach your potential, this show is for you. Because this is a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you've got options from which to choose. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoy this episode of Unlocked. And if you do, make a comment in social media about what you learned and might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube, click that like button. Better yet, subscribe. And if you want to learn more about the show, you just go to my website, madelineblair.com/unlockedtv, and you'll find replays of earlier shows there as well. I encourage you, by the way, to keep your topic and ideas and questions coming to me. Just send them to madeline@madelineblair.com. I love getting them, and they get incorporated into what we do on the show. And check out my book, Unlock, Discover How to Embrace the Unexpected. And if you'd like to explore what it means to build and nurture your resilience with me, send me an email to madeline@madelineblair.com and I'll get back to you. And if you'd like to join the group mentoring program, Unlocking Together, or you're just curious about it, write and tell me that. I'll send you more information about it and keep you informed when the program begins later this month. All right, our topic is when teens are part of the picture. Have you ever said, now when I was your age, teens today are indeed different from what teens were like, certainly when I was a teen. But we live in a different world as well. The internet, cell phones, TikTok, personal computers, constant information and misinformation. It is no wonder that dealing with these things that are completely new to humanity changes how we act. But these changes are happening along with the normal changes that occur during the teenage years, which have always been a part of humanity. It's the time in each of our lives when we are changing as radically as when we were babies growing into children. It is no wonder that our teens are struggling. In the midst of this, they want to have a future they can see that is bright and attractive, that will draw them through the difficulties they're experiencing. They need a vision of themselves for themselves. This month's theme is visioning. It's the beginning of 2023, and we all take a moment to think about the new year and what we might like to achieve over the course of the year, and what should depend on the vision we have for ourselves. It really should depend on that. What do I mean by vision? Well, today I'm introducing a new feature to the show. I call it Explorations. Dr. Ed Hoffman will be joining me to explore this thing called vision. As many of you know, Dr. Ed is the former Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA, and today he teaches at Columbia University and he manages many other assignments around the world. I'm honored to have him join me regularly to explore the theme of the month. So let's step into that exploration. Okay, Ed, so what is this thing called vision? Has it changed over the years?
I think it really has. I don't think we realize how much. I think the world and certainly how we go about things has changed massively. And I think part of what has changed is that we used to do things individually. When you and I were going through school, when we were developing our skills, when we were starting in our careers, I think there was the notion of the individual training, individual competencies, individual visions that then led to leadership. And nowadays, so much happens through what we're doing now, through a community. It happens through social media. It happens through LinkedIn. And when you talk to a lot of the students that we have, is when they're thinking about their vision, they immediately then go talk to their colleagues and friends and create it jointly. And I think it's a substantially different environment than when you're planning for yourself than when you're planning with others in mind. So I think it changes things.
I think that's a really interesting point, especially when you talk about the students. You're right. They love to be talking with one another. But now, what happens to the entrepreneur, the solo entrepreneur? How do you proceed? I mean, I'm certainly in that position today. I mean, I used to have a big company. Well, I've changed that. And I'm thinking, all right, I have a vision. How do I bring others in? Maybe it's by inviting you to conversation.
Yeah. Well, I think also I question the notion of the solo entrepreneur. I really, when you look at these people, they're in aggregates. Even the big tech names, Peter Thiel and Bezos and Musk and all the names you would throw out there, they work in packs. They're not, I don't mean it negatively, but they're almost like wolves in some ways. They don't go out on the attack on their own. They build connections with others. And again, from what I see with people who are looking to create their own opportunities, they immediately identify with friends or colleagues. I was talking to one of our students a few days ago, and she was saying she wants to really start this idea of a knowledge network, but she only wants to do it if she can get at least 2 or 3 other people to work it with her. And I think that's smart, but I think it represents this notion that I don't know if there are solo entrepreneurs. If so, they start that way, and very quickly they line up with others. You have to line up with others for funding, for support, for emotional connection, for solutions. So it's a dramatically different notion than certainly 20, 30 years ago.
Well, the focus of the show is going to be around teenagers.
Yeah.
And does it give them a cop out to say, well, you don't have to do your vision or think about where you want to go because you're going to do it together? How do you help a teenager really get connected with the fact that, yes, there is a sense of, I want to do this in my life. I want to become a lawyer. I want to become an engineer. And that vision actually pulls them, energizes them as they move forward. Is that going to get lost?
I think that's part of what we're seeing. The challenges for young people is that, when you grow up individually, you have parents, you have a path, you have a direction you're going. When you grow up with just multiple relationships, you grow up with the internet, it's a whole different way of relating. One of the questions I'd almost love you to ask is, what is the favorite movies of these teenagers? And I say that because when you mention the notion of vision, I think of Dream. Right? A vision is and my favorite movie, certainly as a kid, was The Wizard of Oz. And I love that movie, but I always felt, and I actually watched it again recently, the ending to me I felt was a little bit of a cop-out. And where I go with that is, as you remember, Judy Garland, who was amazing, right? That was her role, and playing Dorothy. And she gets to the point where she wants to go back home, and Glinda, the good witch, shows up and says, all you got to do is say there's no place like home and click your heels. And she then says, after this poor child has gone through dealing with witches and fire and death and all, you could always have done this. It was always in you. And I remember from the time I was a kid, I was saying, why didn't you tell me that earlier, would you? and so it's always in there. But the other thing that I think makes the movie great is that it's about the networks, it's about the relationships. I don't think she could have been successful if she didn't meet the Scarecrow and then meet the Tin Man. And then they all brought sometimes humor, sometimes feelings and pathos, sometimes a sense of confidence. And so I think I never thought about it until we started just talking about this now, that I think it's a brilliant movie because I think it is about vision and the difficulties and the challenges and the fact that essentially we need to do it with others. And then we get there. And maybe then we recognize we always had the capability. I don't know.
There's another aspect to this. And that is, of course, I look at things from the perspective of resilience.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to convey to parents especially when I'm mentoring their teenagers, I keep telling them, you can't avoid the difficulties. In fact, by avoiding the difficulties for your child, they won't learn to deal with them, and they won't learn that they have the capacity to deal with them.
Yeah.
And resilience is like that. You go through a tough space and a tough spot, and what happens is your resilience goes up because you have exercised. I call it the muscle, but it's not a muscle. It's how you approach things, and you actually become more resilient as a result of making it through. If only because you can look back and say, "I made it through."
Hmm. Yeah. And a lot of your stories, we've known each other a long time, were about resilience. And I think the first story I remember you were talking about was the gardening, story. And so things around growth and rebirth and dealing with the challenges. And I guess what's going through my head right now is, did you have a favorite movie or a book as a child? I don't know, because I'm wondering, does it connect to this whole theme of resilience and overcoming? And
Yeah.
you know,
I don't think I had a favorite book.
okay.
Did I have a favorite movie? I certainly remember The Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
It was an extraordinary visual and a moment in your life. But I think if I'm looking for something that really impacted me, it was that I spent a lot of time in nature. I grew up on a farm, so
Right.
I was outside most of the time, and I would explore the woods. I was the only person in my family who knew just about every leaf and across the acreage that we had, because I had walked it and gotten lost and had to find my way home and fallen in the creek and all kinds of silly things. Well, silly today.
Yeah, that's your growth. I mean, that's where I hear now a lot of the stories come from. I think that.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I think, again, the childhood experiences kind of impact this notion of vision. And I know that some of the discussions have to do with teenagers and the challenges that they have. And I think a lot of it has to do with we have our dreams. And I think we see how others deal with dreams. And we'd like to build up our capability, our resilience, by having others who can help us along the way. And as we go along the way, our goals become just clearer, more iterative. And I think the other thing that I think is so important, particularly the younger you are, is don't give up.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of times you can look at things, you just have a bad day. In hindsight, it's not that big, but and you want to just stop or walk away. And I think the whole notion of creating a vision and getting to it is that persistence and the fact that it's going to get better tomorrow. You're gonna be able to click your heels and you're going to get back home eventually.
I like that. I like that a lot. As we continue to talk about this, I do remember something that affected me, and it wasn't a movie. It was. I haven't thought about this in years. At graduation time from high school, there are awards for the, this person and the valedictorian and the salutatorian and all that stuff. And I never won those things because I never worked hard enough to do it.
Same here. That's why we're doing this together.
But they had what was called the Mathematics Award. And it was given by a national association. And it was a little pin. It was about the size of my end of my finger. I won the Mathematics Award. And I was like, wow. What? And it really changed how I thought about who I was. And it did change my vision for what I would become. Because I ended up studying math. So that's right. Interesting how those tiny little things that you think is nothing. And
the inspirations, you say that was an inspiration for you. The CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, when he wrote his book, I remember him indicating that he was inspired by, I think, 7 other books that others had written that became part of what he called his vision. For moving. One of them I remember was Carol Dweck's book on mindset, the importance of how. And I know that working with folks over there, the fact that they use that as one of their required readings. And so again, this notion of inspiration, being inspired by others, to take this thing on. And again, I think, let's overdo it. The Wizard of Oz, again, this notion that you rely on others, not so much that they can always help you, but that in the process of helping others, we get greater clarity. I always love the character of the Cowardly Lion, because he's in search of courage. And at different points, Dorothy has to set him straight, that don't bully people, but that I'm here to help you. And helping the Cowardly Lion led her to understand what she needed in her own path. And so I think a lot of these people, I think one of the reasons why book clubs, we all read the Bill Gates recommendation or the Economist recommendation or of what to read. And I think, again, it's the potential. Wow, we may find something that inspires us for our vision.
And I think there's one last point I want to make, and that is this aspect that we actually began in our discussion about the fact that maybe vision today is not an individualistic thing, although there may be individualistic aspects to it. It's not individualistic, because part of being able to retain resilience and maintain and nurture it is to have people around you that support you. So it's a double benefit of identifying more about what energizes you and then actually having the support.
Yeah, no, I totally relate to that. And again, the research says clearly that the greatest difficulty comes to those who just are isolated. Yeah. And the importance of having connections and the importance of, whether it's family or friends or colleagues, is having people that you can turn to and discuss with and laugh with and understand through. I think that's really, that's probably the core of, again, what you so well do in terms of coaching, right? I always recommend students to talk to you and then they come back, oh, I had such a wonderful time. And I think what it is that connection, right, of the possibilities and being able to have a sense that we're in there with other people who care for us.
Well, Ed, I just love this conversation, but I think we have to close it off on now and toss the baton on to my guest that's coming, because they're going to talk very specifically about teenagers and this aspect of vision.
Looking forward to that.
Thank you. Thanks again, Ed, for exploring with me what vision means. I'm your host, Madeline Blair, and my guest today, actually guests plural, is Laurel Sim, and much to my delight, will be joined by Nita Gupta. Laura and Nita. Oops, I've got to bring you in. Here we go. Here we go. There you are. Welcome to Unlocked.
Hello.
Hello. Thank you, Madeline.
Oh, thank you. Laurel, let me tell the audience a little bit about you. She's is with Taleo as an Taleo.
Yes.
Taleo. I will say it right. Taleo. As an award-winning program manager and senior project executive. And she is a co-host of the Mission Driven Leader, a fantastic podcast. And what I didn't know when I first met Laurel was that she works pro bono, by the way, with teens and has done so for more than 20 years. Nita is the manager of advisory services, EHR implementation at Nordic Global. Now, Nita has an incredible resume, but to me, the most important thing is that she was a former faculty member at Columbia. And she and I have done a lot of things together, and we always have enjoyed that. So it's wonderful to have you both here on Unlocked.
Thanks for having us, Madeline.
Oh, you're so welcome. Well, our topic is a big one, and we'll only be able to begin the conversation. But I know from my experience with each of you, you're going to talk about strategies and techniques for helping teens during their most difficult years. And maybe that'll come out of your own experience with yourself, as well as those with you that you do with teenagers. So, what is it that brings you to really work with mentoring teens, Laurel?
I think I just fell into it, to be honest. I don't think I really realized that that was an intentional activity until probably the last 5 or 6 years. But what I was finding is that teens would tend to come to me with questions and be very curious, and I'm like, well, just because I answer the question here doesn't mean the conversation should stop. And so I started to be a lot more intentional about what those conversations were and how I was supporting these teens. And in almost every situation, it was about their future. It wasn't about my girlfriend, my boyfriend, what color should my truck be? It was about my future, right? And so I thought, hey, there's something there. There's obviously something that I give off, some ability to communicate, show up for younger people that allows them to be comfortable with me and find mentorship in what I have to say to help them move down their paths.
I really appreciate that you said that they're not there to talk about should they, go out with this boy, or what color is their truck, should their truck be. The teens I've worked with usually ask me very serious questions. Is that your experience, Nita?
It absolutely is. I actually had the privilege of attending a 14-year-old's birthday party recently, my cousin, and met about 8 of her friends. And I was fascinated at the range of topics and the questions that they would ask me. And those questions were very serious, very targeted about their career path, their future, how expensive college is, but also how do you strive to be the best self and making sure you don't go back on your promises. So they are definitely very serious topics, and they are trying to understand what is next for them.
What challenges do you see? Laurel, Nita, whoever wants to chime in first.
Well, I think my number one challenge is there's not enough people that are willing to take the time with teenagers to actually have really fruitful, real conversations with them that they're actually looking for. They're looking for these discussions. They're looking for, somebody to be open and honest with them without, breaking them so that they can't get up the next morning. And I think that's a real sad state of affairs for the world, that as we as professionals aren't putting the time in to these young people. I think Whitney Houston had it right when she said, teach the children, right? Like, because that is our future. So why are we not putting the time into them? I think that's the number one challenge for sure.
I would agree with that. From my experience, they want people who are willing to talk to them and listen to them, but also offer advice that may be beneficial. But I feel a lot of that is for us being able to relate to teenagers. And when I was at that birthday party, it made me reflect on my own experiences as a teenager. And as we age, as we go through different experiences, our way of thinking actually deviates from a teenager's way of thinking, which is how life is supposed to work. We're supposed to grow, but we have to be able to get back to being able to relate to teenagers and understand what drives them and motivates them.
This aspect of acknowledging them as legitimate conversation partners, I'll put it that way, that really does say a great deal to anyone. I mean, I'm not a teenager anymore, but if you engage in conversation with me that acknowledges that I have an opinion and something to share, that's a real affirmation of who I am. So clearly teenagers are really desiring that, from what I hear from the both of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the chance of talking to someone versus talking at them changes the entire experience. I don't talk at my clients. I talk to them. Mm-hmm. I ask questions. I better understand how they're thinking and why they're thinking that way. And it's no different with these teenagers that are trying to figure out what their future is, which is a very scary thing for them. And helping them to break it down that it doesn't have to be scary is a pretty powerful tool, if you will.
I talked a lot about the differences in today's culture, but what do you see from your experiences? What are the challenges that teenagers themselves feel? Because my sense is they're not challenged by the technology, those of us who didn't grow up in it.
Well, for me, I think it's not the technology at all. In fact, I think it's the amount of information that's coming to them and them not being able to break it down
Mm.
to understand what does that mean for me? Like who am I going to be now that I know all of this? How's that change things? We've got a really interesting phase in the world right now where we're probably going to have an additional 30% in new careers happening in the next 15 years. That's never kind of really been heard of before. And then of that 30% that is new, there's actually like 10% that are moving away that will never exist again because of AI and because of all of this new capability in the world. And so we have to create and allow these people, these young people, to be okay with ambiguity, to be flexible and adaptable and take information in and be able to decipher what that information means in order for where their career can go. Because their career could literally change 10 times. But how are we giving them the tools to allow them to be aware of that? How are we giving them the tools to be like, oh my goodness, I see that I can do all of these things. All I have to do is a little deviation right. That's what I think anyways. I don't know.
Nita, your perspectives on that?
I 100% agree with everything you just said, Laurel. Being able to have them be comfortable with ambiguity and really practice resilience. What I would also add to that is from my own experiences and questions from teenagers that have asked me is building relationships and growing their support network. And as teenagers go into high school, as they look at colleges, I think one of their biggest concerns is how do I make friends? How do I grow that support system as I'm going onto my path of independence? And that seems to be a common theme. And from my own experience, I had no idea how to network when I left college. It's not a skill that's taught to you. And it is a skill that needs to be developed from an early age so it doesn't result in awkward conversations at a dinner party or at a conference. But that is one of those areas that I think we need to be able to equip teenagers the right way to have certain conversations and the purpose and the intent behind those conversations. If it's to build a friendship, if it's to connect with someone in a course, or if they're really looking to grow their network, part of their knowledge network.
Laurel and Nita, I just want to remind you, this is a conversation. So please just chime in whenever you feel like you need to do so.
Yeah, I do. I don't disagree with the networking side of things. I do and it goes back to what Ed was saying earlier in the visioning side. I do actually think the youth do understand community. They've had community their entire time that they've growing up. They just maybe don't acknowledge it as what we acknowledge it to be, like LinkedIn and professional organizations. You have your drama clubs, your academic clubs, your sporting teams. Those are all communities. And I had them in spades when I was going to school. And looking back, I always felt like I had all of these different friends of these different areas, and I would get confused at times because I'd have my student council, of which I was on, and then I played on numerous sporting teams, and then I lived out at the farm. So I had all of these different friend groups, and then I got confused as to, is that okay to have all these different groups, right? So I actually knew how to network, not knowing what the word network was, but I didn't know how to bring the networks together. And I think that was the missing opportunity for me. Had I understood that it was okay to commingle your communities, that it would actually really benefit you. And I think that the more that we can introduce that understanding of network, that understanding of sharing communities, building and transforming groups, I think that's a real opportunity for students. I think it's a great opportunity for the universities because that's going to make people more comfortable when they're there. And more importantly, I think it makes more people stable once they get out of these institutions and are on their own, that they know how to be social and how to create those connections because it's comfortable for them.
Laurel, that actually reminds me of what I try to do in projects at work, kind of current day and age, is breaking down silos, being able to bring all those groups together. So that is definitely a valuable lesson to learn early on.
Well, I think there's another aspect to this, because I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I currently am tutoring among the people I tutor is a young woman at 15, and she's incredibly adept once she understands that she's really part of the conversation. And that comes back to our earlier points about acknowledging that they are a human being. But she does have that question that you mentioned, Nita, or Laura rather, of how to bring the different groups together, and recognizing that that's really part of what an adult life is all about. So that's fascinating. Do you offer specific practices to them, or do you just talk about it and explore what they do? And I'm curious about that.
So Madeline, I think it comes down to what is it that they want to achieve, right? So most of the youth that I work with tend to be in the level of 16 to 22. So trying to figure out where they want to go into school, or now I'm in school and I'm loving it. How do I advance my career once I finish? So those are kind of the groups that I typically work with. So they have different needs and different demands. And I sit down like you would in a coaching session and be like, what's your ultimate goal out of me working with you, us having these conversations? What is it that you want to get out of it in a year's time, in 6 months' time? And once we break that part down, then we actually create our action plan. It was really quite funny. I lectured at a university here in Canada, and I thought that this one student wasn't listening because he was in his computer the entire time. I thought he was not listening to me at all. So I kind of poked at him a little bit in the lecture. And everybody in the class was like, oh, no, he's the guy that listened, like he's taking all of the notes. He's heard every word you've said. And I'm like, okay. And then at the end I said, I always offer up that I'm here to do mentorship and coaching with them if so desired, but there's a lot of responsibility in that. He was the first one to reach out, and he still, he has a good career now. He's successful. And he still reaches out to tell me different things, or to ask me, I'm going for this interview, or, I'm having this challenge. And now it's more a colleague to colleague. But we had to establish what he wanted, back to your original question. And all he wanted was somebody to help him navigate the complexities of moving from a university life, of which he's been very successful, into a business life where he wants to have that same success, that same thriving feeling. And he also had lived in China and come to Canada to learn English and to go to school here. So it was also even more of a different experience. Mm-hmm. And the entire time I said, I will work with you, but what you have to do is you have to be committed. This is about you being committed, you showing up. And you've got all of everything that you need. I'm just going to remind you of those things. And he was amazing at following through on every commitment and working through everything I would tell him to do, and come back reporting in. And I think that that's the key, is if we use him as our example, if you want to, as you're leaving university, figure out how you're going to get that first job. Okay, well, let's revisit your resume. Let's look at your LinkedIn file. Tell me what companies you love. And then let's talk about what kind of jobs at those companies that we could see you fitting into. Give me job descriptions of jobs you think would be cool. Does that fit with your capability right now? Let's do a matrix on it, right? We did all of those things, and it sounds like maybe overwhelming at first, but if you do them one little step at a time, and you stay committed to it, it's very fruitful at the end.
That one step at a time, I really like that, because now I'm working with teenagers that are younger than the group that you're talking about, and they have so many things that distract them naturally. I mean, they've got homework to do, They've got sports that they're supposed to do, because if they want to go to college, they have to do sports and they have to do social things. I mean, they're pulled apart. So you have to give them small tasks, I find, to give it a small task, one at a time, and then let them build. And I think, Nita, you and I had an experience where we watched this person. She was trying to decide what college to go to. And Nita, I'm going to let you talk about that, how she developed her factors.
Sure. She actually had a very robust, I would say, matrix of factors that she had developed. And when I saw it, it actually reminded me of prioritization criteria. And the one question I asked her was, what is important to you? Is it about the quality of the education? Is it the faculty to student ratio? Is it the geographical location, the nightlife and the parties? What is most important? And her answer, I mean, I think definitely very, very, very insightful for someone of her age from, I mean, comparing to my own experience when I was that age, not the general population, but she understood how to prioritize and how to prioritize the different factors and criteria. And it's one of those that I think that specific skill set related to time management, which is, they go hand in hand for me, is something that I still use every day. I think both of you still use it every day, but there are always going to be competing priorities in life, and being able to understand the different factors, the benefits and the trade-offs, and understanding why you should pick one criteria over another is absolutely essential. But I think, Laurel, kind of going back to your point, those are additional tools that we should be able to spend more time developing. Just going back to the time management piece, it's not just about kind of setting a routine and sticking to it, because that's what we have when we're in high school. That's what we have to figure out how to structure ourselves when we're in college. But it's understanding that prioritization piece. And I think going back to, how do you manage your time? How do you work with the different groups of people or meet the different groups of people? Like you, Laurel, I had multiple groups of friends when I was in college, and I didn't understand how to commingle them, but I never had enough time to spend with them. So I think at one point I just said, enough is enough. I'm just going to invite them all. Whoever shows up, shows up. I learned a lot about conflict resolution during that party. So
a little ancillary benefit, huh?
Absolutely.
Do either of you work with the parents, or I should say deal, not work with the parents, but deal with the parents of these young people?
So the students that I've been working with typically come from my lecture sessions. So I also speak to young females in science and technology, and so usually the beginning of the discussion is from them being introduced to me at a lecture level. However, I do find that a lot of my colleagues and friends reach out to me on a regular basis to talk about how can I help my son figure out where he's going to go. What, this one doesn't think he's going to go to university after. We don't care if it's not university, but he needs some sort of education. How can we do this? And so I get pulled in on a regular basis. And I think, back to the beginning conversation, not sure why, but we're all here for a reason, right? We obviously see the passion and the energy that these teens can bring to the future, as long as we're watering them properly. And so for me, when you have that kind of energy, people naturally will come to you with it. And I think that the parents that I talk to, the colleagues that I talk to, they're just very nervous. They're very anxious about, how do we instill the need for a secondary education? How do we make sure that we've given them enough support so that they know what they need to go off and do? They don't listen to us for where they should be going to university. They don't listen to us for how much it's going to cost. They don't listen. There's a lot of don't listens out there, and I get it, right? But that's because you're the parent and you clearly don't have a clue. So it's fine, parents. It's fine. No, it's not fine, but you can't stop that. Those are your children. So that's why you set them up with a mentor. That's why you get them in different courses, get them listening to cool podcasts like Unlocked. But make sure that you get creative and don't allow the you don't get it to be the reason why you stop the conversation.
3 cheers on that one. But there is that angst that you have as a parent. I mean, I remember it. I mean, I even have angst about my grandson. So it continues on because you really want them to be happy. You want them to grow into who they put the real potential that they have. And you know that the world is going to make that hard for them to do. Not purposefully, it's how it is. And so you really do worry about it. But I do appreciate your comment to remind the parents that it really will work out. Somehow that child really will grow up and do something.
Laurel, how do you work with the parents to help align their vision with their kids?
Well, first I say it's actually not your vision, so you don't get to have it. I don't know. Like, I'm just a business owner, right? Like, I just say what I think, Nita. And trust me, my husband tells me to be quiet often. But the point is I don't have the right answer. All I know is that if you're trying to instill your vision on me to make it my vision, I'm not going to buy in. Because it has to come from me. I have to believe it. So how would that be any different than me when I was 16? It wouldn't be. And in fact, I was probably, well, not a little bit, far worse, far more, stubborn than I am now. So we can't thrust people's visions on our children, but what we can do is we can say, like, you don't have to go to university, but you have to learn something. You have to get a trade. You have to get skills to be able to be an entrepreneur. And if you want to talk to an entrepreneur, son, daughter, I've got someone that you can talk to. And that's actually what a friend has done. She's like, if you want to be an entrepreneur, okay, what's your idea? And, he said his idea and she's like, okay, then you go talk to Laurel about it and see if she'd give you money to do it. And he's like, what? Well, if you think it's such a good idea, Laurel's an entrepreneur. I'm sure that, if she thinks it's a good idea, she'll give you some money to make it happen. Right. And then all of a sudden he's like, wow, that was just because I didn't want to go to university. She's like, oh, okay, now we're talking. Right. So they kind of use me as a tool that way.
Called his bluff, huh?
Yeah. But what was really fantastic out of that story is that he reached out to me and said, I want to know more about real estate. Do you have real estate property? And I'm like, yeah, I do. Let's talk about it. And, he had lots of questions and we didn't get all the questions answered, Madeline. But what we did do is we started a conversation again to keep thinking. And that's the one thing that you don't want the teen to stop doing is stop being curious. Because if they stop being curious, you've somehow let the conversation down. Mm. And for me, and I've let the conversation down before, but I've figured out that I've let it down, and then I reignite it with more curiosity again. But the second you let the curiosity leave, you've failed. So that's the one thing I would tell parents, like, allow the curiosity to continue. Mm. It's like when they were 2 and they asked you why and you got tired of the whys. Now they're asking you whys, but they have their own opinion. So now you have to participate. You don't get to just tell the why answer.
Oh, darn. It's more work.
I know. It's exhausting.
Now, speaking of work, when I many years ago, I taught at Hood College. And one of the jobs that I had was it was in the business school. So I had to find internships for our students. Now, these were not teenagers, but they were certainly in the 18, 19, 20 range. So with no experience. And I found it to be a really challenging job to get a business to say, yes, we'll take on an intern. Now, the internships were, they were like 6 weeks long. And they would give me all kinds of reasons why they couldn't do it at the moment. And the bottom line was they just didn't know how they were going to cope with someone who didn't know how to do business. Now, Nita, I'm going to pass this to you. What's your thoughts on that, and why would a company want to do an internship and willing to make that investment?
Oh, well, I have a lot of thoughts on this one, Madeline. So my undergrad program, one of my prioritization factors was actually an internship program that was built into the curriculum. And so for me, it was about being able to take the theory that I'm learning in my classes and do a practical application. So I myself as an individual can learn the soft skills and the hard skills to be able to succeed in the corporate world. So for a student's perspective, it's equipping them with that experience. So they're not as green or they're not as new when they go out into the corporate world. But on behalf of the business and the corporation, I think it's a way for them to become mentors, to help grow a student's career path, to give them an experience. And they may or may not be paid for it or compensated for it, but it's also a way, I think, for the company or business to get a fresh perspective. I'm actually a student, I'm actually a current student right now in a master's program at Dartmouth in healthcare delivery science. And we're working with 2 organizations. And the beauty of it is us being able to take our learnings from that program to be innovative, to be collaborative, and working with a team of that have all different backgrounds and experiences, and having fresh eyes on a challenge or an opportunity that the organization is trying to solve. And that, I think, is just an unparalleled experience for both the folks who are working on it, the people that the team is working with, but also the organization.
Laurel, do you ever bring in interns?
I'm going to jump all over this, how angry and how unimpressed I am with people and their inability to value internships, to the point where I actually feel like it should be mandatory for organizations. I don't know what, let's document this, that if you have more than 50 people in your organization, it's mandatory that you have an internship program there. Because this is where they get to learn. And so many people are like, oh, well, what does 6 weeks really give a person? Well, let's make it 12 weeks then, right? Like if it's the length of time, we could add to the length of time. Don't use that as your excuse. Wow, I'm a really busy person. Aren't we all? We're just so fancy. We're just so fancy that we got to be busy all the time and take no time to educate and inform people. And then we get angry when we can't hire quality resources. Well, who do you think is the cause of that, you donkeys? Sorry, Madeline, but I had to throw the donkey in there. It's because you're not putting the time in the beginning. So imagine if you wanted to be a great hockey player, right? But you didn't learn to skate very well while you were figuring it out. And then you got on the ice with these athletes and they're all skating circles around you. And you're like, but I wanted to be a great hockey player. I read all the books. You know, I watched all the TV shows and I know all the rules. Why can't I be a great hockey player? Because you didn't practice. Well, not only did I not practice, I wasn't given the opportunity to get on a team. So how could I practice properly? It pisses me right off. And so here's the challenge that I put out to business owners on a regular basis is, why wouldn't you bring somebody in just to shadow you? Mm-hmm. What just say, this is your only role because I'm a really busy guy, is to shadow me and watch the experiences that I have. Because at a minimum, they're going to be like, whoa, I never want to be an accountant. That's so boring. I'm just joking. Sorry, accountants. Sorry. No, but at least they understand what you go through in a day-to-day setting. At least they understand the struggles that you have, the volatility of things, the complexity of things. Like at least they're in it, being more aware. So that could be just that 6-week experience, right? Like we're not asking for you to spend hours and hours a day with the person, but why are we not forcing organizations to say, like, this is actually a requirement? You have to do this. Sorry.
No, don't be sorry about that. I, in fact, have interns every chance I have, and you have to find them and you have to make that offer. And sometimes schools aren't willing to let you do that. I have a wonderful intern right now, and you're right. There are things that not only that she can do, but if you think about it carefully, look at what their skills are. Yes, they can shadow, and that's the easiest thing, but for them. But the key is, what can they do, and then how do you give them a task that's just a little bit beyond that, so they're stretched while they do it. So they're not only learning how to interact with a supervisor, a manager, a leader, or whatever. They're also building their skills, because I do like this emphasis on skills, because the skill per se, the specific skill is going to be important, but the ability to learn new skills is going to be absolutely essential.
Well, I ask them when they come in and work with me, I'm like, okay, you have to go find a job description that you want to go after outside of this. And so then they'll give it to me, and it'll be like, oh, facilitation. I'm like, well, have you ever facilitated before? No. Okay, so that's going to be our one job. You might not be doing it with a client in the room, but you might be doing it with my team. But we'll set something up so that we can work on your facilitation skills. You can watch me while I am facilitating, because that's a big area of what I do for a living. So we've got it covered. We're going to check it off the list. But we also have to hold them accountable to what is it, the skills that I need to learn, so that I can push you, boss, individual that's hired me, of what it is that I want to achieve out of this, because it is a two-way street, right? You have to hold each other accountable in that relationship. And Nita, I think you had said earlier on, or Madeline, I don't remember which, that maybe they just don't understand how to be a mentor or coach. And I don't disagree with that. But at this phase in your life, you got to figure it out.
Yes.
I just think that's an excuse at that point, right? Like, let's grow up. Like, you've learned all these other capabilities to do all of these other things, but to mentor and coach a team, come on, that's stuff that you should pride in, more pride than winning an award from an organization that won't remember your name next year. Because I'll tell you what, these students that I intern with, some of them, I've got 3 of them that have been working with me for 12 years, right? Like, that's our relationship. They're now part of my team because they're that good. They were always that good. All of them have been that good, right? It's giving them the chances to.
Okay.
Well,
speaking of chances, we've run out of time. I can hardly believe this.
That's because I got on my soapbox there. Sorry.
It was a great soapbox.
Okay, good.
I agree with you. Okay, well, thank you both. This has been fabulous. I mean, the ideas that have come out of this is just fantastic. Acknowledging teenagers, helping them build relationships, the emphasis on skills, and I love this aspect that you mentioned, Laurel, about remaining curious about that individual. Well, I like to say lots of things at the end, but I think I would rather give you, Laurel, and Nita, just what's one piece of advice you would give to teenagers? Laura, why don't we begin with you?
Sure. I'm going to give 2 pieces of advice, one for parents and one for teenagers. For the teenagers, I think you just have to have the courage to find people to ask questions of. They're there. They're in your community. They're your teachers. They're your friends, parents. They're coaches. They're there. And just find a way to create some space for that curiosity, because what you're asking does matter and it is impactful. And finding the right person is going to make a difference. And then for the parents, I want them to research the term VUCA. So that's VUCA. It's volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And I want you to understand it, and I want you to learn it, so that when you're with your children, that you are experiencing it and being okay with the VUCA of which you're in, the volatility and the craziness of not having the answers for them. You don't have to have the answers. You have to be curious with them to go find the answers.
Great. How about you, Nita?
I would say for teenagers to keep in mind that every experience that you go through, it's not always going to be a success. Some of them will be failures. and they may leave you questioning what is next. It's going to give you a period of uncertainty in your life. But just remember that each one is going to be a learning experience, and it's going to provide you with some insight about you and give you some self-awareness, but also help you practice resilience. And so my ask to every teenager is really this: with every experience you go through, take some time to reflect on it and understand, what did you like about it? What didn't you like? What you enjoyed. And my hope is that as you go through that reflection on every experience, every teenager will be able to understand just a little bit more about what is driving them, what motivates them. And that understanding from my experience is going to be absolutely pivotal to how you see and define success for yourself, but also how you're going to start creating your vision, as well as take steps to execute on that vision.
Well, thank you both. Thank you, Laurel. Thank you, Nita. This has been a wonderful conversation. And I want to thank all my audience for joining us in this conversation. I'm Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.